And Boker Tov. Today's Daf Yomi is Zevachim 67. We're going to start at the Mishnah on 66b. Says the Mishnah on 66b on the bottom. It says the Kulan Emetam Beis Abuya. We're talking about the bird offerings. There's two types of bird offerings. There's what's called an Ola and a Chatas. So both of them, if you mess up the offering somehow, and you do the malika, which is how you kill the bird, but it's not a kosher offering. Still, the malika takes it out, so it no longer transmits tuma, which is called the tumas beis habuya. The bird offerings, typically a bird, if it's a carcass, will transmit tuma in the mouth. That's called the beis habuya when you eat it. But if the malika on it will not transmit tuma, umol in bahen, and since they can't be eaten, then there's me'ila on them. Me'ila is where you misappropriate temple property. Once the Kohen could eat it, me'ila no longer applies. But in this case, they can't be eaten, so me'ila applies. Chutz, with the exception of a chatas of she'asa lamata k'maseh chatas Hashem chatas, except if the chatas of the bird offering for a sin, if it was done properly, then there's no me'ila on it because the Kohen could eat it. And so once the Kohen could eat it, there's no me'ila because it's allowed. So now the Gemara goes through it. Ola sa'ov she'asa lamata k'maseh chatas. Let's say you have a bird that's you designate for an ola. That's supposed to be brought above the altar, on the top of the altar, but you brought it below, and you did everything for this ola like the chatas. You did it like the chatas, l'shem chatas, for the purpose of chatas. Basically, you brought the ola like a chatas. Rabbi Eliezer says molenba. Rabbi Eliezer says, well, it's still an ola, and there still can be me'il on it, whereas Rabbi Yeshua says ein molenba. Rabbi Yeshua says no, the ola has now become a chatas, and so therefore, like a chatas that's brought, there's no me'ila also here. Gemara doesn't. The Mishnah has not explained the logic yet of Rabbi Yeshua. The Gemara is going to explain that the logic of Rabbi Yeshua, which the Mishnah hasn't fleshed out yet, is because, in his opinion, the ola can become a chatas. That if you bring the ola all the way below, then it becomes a chatas. The ola that's brought according to all the laws of a chatas becomes the chatas. It becomes a different offering. It's called the aspect of hamshacha. So the Gemara says, so Rabbi Shua says there's no me'ila because it's a chatas. I'm Rabbi Eliezer. Why is there no me'ila there? Just like a chatas, that if you do it properly for the right purpose, there's no me'ila. Kishashina shma, when you do the chatas with the wrong intent and you do it for an ola molenba, then there is me'ila. Ola shemolenba lishma, ola that if you do it for the right purpose, there is me'ila. Kishashina shma, if you make it for a chatas, for sure it should be me'ila. Rabbi Yeshua responds to that logic. Well, no, if you say this by a chatas because you change the name to an ola, you change it to something that has me'ila. Tomar ba'ola, will you say the same law by an ola? Sheshina shmal Hashem chatas. You say it by an ola that we change it to chatas. Shekeinshina shmal davar she'ein bo me'ila. You change it to something that there's no me'ila on it. So the Gemara, basically back and forth, and the Mishnah on top of 67a continues the discussion. Amrlo Rabbi Eliezer on top of 67a. Rabbi Eliezer says, "Varei kochi kochim sheshachtam b'daron." Kochi kochim is the ola, the chatas, and the asham. If you're supposed to slaughter them in the north, let's say you did them in the south. V'shachtam l'shem kochim column, and you did it for the purposes of koche column, that should prove. You change it to something like a shlomim, which once it's done, there's no me'il on it, but nevertheless, there is me'il in this case. So don't be surprised by the you change it to a chatas where there's no me'ila on that, that there is me'ila. Amar Rabbi Yeshua, he says, no. He says, no, the chatas, the koche kachim, you change to something that still has me'ila on it, because even after you slaughter the korban shlomim, there's still me'ila on the murim, the parts of it. Tomar ba'ola sheshina shmal davar shakul ater. But once a chatas is slaughtered, totally different. The whole chatas, none of it goes on the mizbeach, the chatas ha'of. It's all eaten by the Kohen, so it's completely permitted. So he says it's not the same. So Mishnah has not explained the logic of Rabbi Yeshua. And so the Gemara now cites a brisa. She continues this conversation, continues it. Between Rabbi Eliezer and Rabbi Yeshua. Tanya, Amar Rabbi Eliezer, Rabbi Yeshua, Asham sheshachtu b'tzafon, L'shem shlomim yochiach. He says if you have a carbon asham to again a kochi kachim, which is supposed to be slaughtered in the north, and if you slaughtered it for the purpose of a shlomim, that proves that I'm correct. That there's meat. You had a question? He says the asham sheshalta b'tzafo, and if you take this kochi kachim, which is supposed to be slaughtered in the north, and you did it for the purpose of a shlomim, that'll prove that Rabbi Eliezer is correct, that the olah has the me'il, that the olah that you do below, there's still me'il on it. Why? Sheshina Shmo, you change the name from the asham to a shlomim, umoenbon, there's still me'il on it. Afata altet mal olah, so too says Rabbi Eliezer, my carbon olah sa'of, sheshina shma, then I change the name, then I change it to a chatos, she'imal, but there should still be me'ilah. The Rabbi Yeshua responds, no, asham, it's not the same. Imshina eshmo, shina esmekomo. You still slaughtered it in the north, but the olah that you bring as a chatos, you slaughtered it underneath. It's supposed to be on top. So, tomar ba'olah sheshina eshma v'shina esmekoma. They're not the same. Let me just finish this case. And Amar Rebbe Lezer, well, asham sheshachtu b'darom l'shem shlamim yochiach. Well, let's say you change the place of the asham and you did it in the south. That should prove that I'm right. Sheshina eshmo, v'shina esmekomo. You change the name and the place. And therefore, so don't be surprised by the olah. So to the olah, even though you change the name in the place, there's still me'ila on it. So it says Rabbi Shua, no. No, in the end of the day, by the asham, you change the name in the place, but you didn't change the action. What does that mean? Gemara is going to say he still kept it for the same owner. Tomar ba'olah sheshina eshma v'esmasev v'shina esmakoma. So it's not the same parallel. You had a question, Bill? Yeah.
So in the Mishnah, what we just discussed in Kata, and all of a sudden now we're discussing Asha.
Yeah, because the Mishnah was talking about an olah that you brought like a chatas. Those are the two birds. And Rabbi Eliezer said that even though you did the olah like the chatas, so the chatas are off, there's no me'ilah once it's brought because it's all eaten by the Kohanim. And Rabbi Eliezer said even though you did the olah like the chatas, there's still me'ilah on it. So Rabbi Yeshua responded that there's no me'ilah on it. And so Rabbi Eliezer is bringing other examples of a carbon, even though you change it, that the me'ilah prohibition still remains. No, the opposite. The olah is completely burnt, and the chatas is part. And the chatas is part. So asham in that sense is like the chatas. So Amar Rava v'neimele. So it says Rava, why didn't Rabbi Eliezer respond? Well, why didn't he give the exact case that Rabbi Yeshua was talking about, where you brought the asham in the south and you change the name and you change the intent and you change the owner? Why didn't he do that? From the fact that he didn't do that, from the fact that he didn't say that, Shmami, no, we see from here, Nachas Rabbi Eliezer, what time of the Rabbi Yeshua. We see from here that Rabbi Eliezer has actually, he now finally understands the reasoning of Rabbi Yeshua. And the Mishnah wasn't clear what the reasoning of Rabbi Yeshua. And so the Rava says he now understands the reasoning. And what's the reasoning? Now this is the crux of the daf. The Amar Rav Advar Abba, Omer Ayu Rabbi Yeshua, that Rav Advar Abba says that what was the reasoning for Rabbi Yeshua? Olas Ha'of Sha'asa Mata Kamasechat Shkoach Tani. Olas Ha'of, if you have an olive and oaf that you brought below, like the action of a chatos, l'shem chatos, with the intent of the chatos. Kivan Shemolk Pas Simanecha. Once you did the malika on one siman, meaning you killed the bird by cutting through one siman, which is exactly the way the chatos is killed. Nimsheches v'nasis chatas oaf. The olas oaf has now become transformed into a chatas oaf. So that's why Rabbi Yeshua says there is no me'ilah on this olah, because this olah has become a chatas. That's his argument, that if you do the olah exactly like the chatas, the olah becomes a chatas. So the Gemara says, well, if that's the case, that's his logic. Why don't we say the same thing in the reverse? If you bring the chatas oaf above, like the olah, do it exactly like the olah. Once you do the one siman above, let it become transformed into olas oaf. You had a question, Bill? Look, siman echad, be'idoch siman on the other siman, it'll become an olas oaf. And if you want to say hachinami, yeah, that's actually what Rabbi Yeshua says also. He says, just like the olah becomes a chatos, the chatos becomes an olah. No, but we have a problem saying that. Why? because this is the form of the Mishnah. Meaning to say, my love, doesn't that mean that this is what the Mishnah is? That the Ola can become a Chatas, but nothing about the Chatas becoming an Ola. Maybe that's all it's saying. Gemara says, no, we're not going to say that. Gemara says, and the Gemara says, Mishnah. No, this is the whole Mishnah. That just like Rabbi Yeshua says that Ola become a Chatas, you also would agree that Chatas come in Ola. But then Rav Ashi gives a different explanation. He says, no, there's a fundamental difference between the Ola and the Chatas. By the way, my father says about this sugya, he says, this sugya is for the birds. You like that joke? Yes. Okay. Rav Ashi says, thank you, Deborah. Like Rav Ashi says, he says it makes sense to say there's a distinction. I understand the Olas Oaf if you did it below like the action of a Chatas, you did it for the purpose of a Chatas. There's a fundamental difference. The Ola, you need both simanim, the trachea and the esophagus, to make it a kosher malika. But the Chatas, you only need one. So in that case, says Rav Ashi, Bishlam also given the Chatas is kosher with one siman, and since there's no Olas Oaf below, given the Malak plus Simon Echad, once you did the Malika on one Simon, it's obviously just the Chatas at that point. Then it can only be the Chatas Oaf. But the opposite is not true. Chatas Oaf, given the Marmar, Malika Bekom Makom. Since we know that the Chatas Oaf can do the Malika anywhere, Malika Bekom Makom Cher, Malak plus Simon Echad, once you did one Malika on the Chatas Oaf on above, Ifsala, Ifsala, and then you did some other action to indicate that it was a Chatas, now you go to do the other Simon, and so now it's no longer able to be an Ola because it was disqualified. How does it continue to be the Olas Oaf? Meaning to say it's already been disqualified. The Ola can become a Chatas because the second you did one, we said it's just Chatas. But the Chatas, when you try to do it like an Ola, then it's not going to work. What do you say? Okay. So now the Gemara is going to challenge this opinion that Rav Ada bar Hava's explanation of Rabbi Yeshua. So basically, we said that Rabbi Yeshua, according to Rav Ada bar Hava, Rabbi Yeshua's other position that the Ola that you do below becomes a Chatas through Amshacha, it's transformed. The Gemara is going to challenge this. So on the top of 67b, the Gemara is going to challenge this first from a Mishnah in Kinim. And Kinim is generally considered to be the most difficult tractate. And the Mishnahs that we're about to cite, not really the first one, but the second one, the Tiferes Yisrael, who wrote the commentary, the classic commentary on the Mishnahs, he says, this is the Mishnah that's the most difficult in the entire Talmud. But we are not afraid of anything in the Daf Yomi. Because if this was, let's say, a school where they said, we're just going to do the most interesting sugyas, then we would skip it. But the Daf Yomi, we skip nothing. That's why it's called the Yomi and Daf. We skip nothing every day of our lives. So if you don't understand it, you do the best you can, and at least you tried. You didn't say, when it comes to Shemayim, Hashem won't be able to say, why didn't you open that Masechta? Why did you skip it? He said, I didn't skip it. Okay, so what's a woman after she gives birth has to bring two birds. One is an Ola, one is a Chatas. One bird is an Ola, one bird is a Chatas. The pair of birds is called a Kan, a pair. She has to bring either two pigeons, which are called Torim, or Bnei Yonah, or doves. They look exactly alike, basically. But if you mix them up, you bring the Ola, the Chatas, or Chatas and Ola, then they're no good. Now you can see why it can easily get confused, because they look exactly like these birds. So, Tashma, Chatas Lazu Ola. Let's say one woman had to bring the Chatas, and one woman had to bring the Ola. So they each, yeah.
One bird for a Chata and another bird for
yeah. That's the case of a woman who gives birth. But sometimes a woman will make a vow that she wants to make a vow to just bring an Ola as an offering, a bird Ola as an offering.
So, two different birds.
They look exactly the same.
Oh, not.
Exactly. Becomes complicated. So Tashma, so let's say one woman had to bring a chatas and one woman had to bring an ola. So he said, let's combine together. We'll buy a pair together, and my bird will be a chatas and your bird will be an ola. And Asa Shtein Lamala, and the Kohen ended up on 67b at the top. The Kohen ended up bringing both of them above. He brought both of the korbanos above. So then we're going to say under those circumstances. So if it's above, it cannot be a chatas. It has to be an ola. So mechza kasher or mechza pasal. The one who needed an ola had their offering, and the one who needed a chatas, it didn't get it. But shtein lamata, let's say you brought both of them below. Mechza kasher, the one who needs a chatas is kosher, and the one who needs an ola is pasal. Achas lamala, achas lamata. Let's say he brought one above and one below. Shtein psuos. Then both of them are disqualified because I'll say Shani Omer Chatas Karvel Malav or Karvel Mata. I'll say, how do you know if they brought them properly? Maybe the Chatas was brought above and the Ola was brought below. So the Gemara's question is like this: Nihinami the Ola Karvel Mata. But okay, even if the Ola was brought below, according to Rabbi Yeshua, it should have become a Chatas Oaf. So this is the question: how, if does Rabbi Yeshua really say the Ola becomes a Chatas Oaf? Well, here we have a case where it doesn't. The Gemara says, Amar Damar Rabbi Yeshua b'cha Gavra betray Gavra miyami. No, he says the ola can become chatas if it's one person, but if it's two different people, your ola cannot become my chatas. So that he wouldn't say. Bill, you had a question? So now the Gemara brings another attempt, and the Tashma, and the Gemara says chatas v'ola usesuma umufarashet. So now, what's the case of this next Mishnah? The next Mishnah is basically there's 6 birds. One woman's bringing a chatas, one woman's bringing an oa. Then there's a pair. Yeah.
This was the thing that they're messing up is where they do.
Yeah, because the ola has to. Well, no, the ola has to be above and the chatas has to be below. The ola doesn't have zrika. The ola just has mitzah, it has squeezing of the blood. But after the killing of it, that's when they realize the mistake. Before they come to, there's no zrika by a bird. There's hazah by a chatas, and then there's mitzah squeezing up by the ola. So they did the one above according to the laws of an ola, and they did below according to the laws of a chatas. We're on 67b, Moshe. So the Gemara's question now comes, Navon, I don't know if you were in here when we said this, that this is Keenum is basically game theory. It's the origins of game theory is really in Keenum. That's all. That's with a chaf. This is with a kuf. It's like a khan, a pair of birds. So there were 2 women. Each one has to bring 3 birds. Why? One has to bring 2 because she has her obligation because she gave birth. That's an ola and a chatas. And 1 because she made a voluntary ola offering. So each woman has to do this. So at the end of the day, they each have to. There's a total of 6 birds. They're basically 2 chatas and 4 olas that have to be brought. But one bird will be a chatas, and the second one is an ola, and the other group wasn't specified. It was sesuma. It says the Kohen, you choose when you get up there. And then the third group was mifureshes. It was clear. One is an ola, one is a chatas. But also, mifureshes said this bird's an ola, this bird's a chatas. But then what did the Kohen do? The Kohen did all of them above, all 6 above. So now let's see what does he do if he does all 6 above? Mechza kosher, because then we're going to say half of them are kosher, meaning to say 2 of the olos that are. Hold on 1 second. So we have 3 olas and 3 chatas because they each have a pair that they have to bring, and then one has to bring an ola and one has to bring a chatas. So then the Kohen did all of them above. So mechza kasher, mechza pasul. So we're going to say half can be for an ola. So we fulfilled 3 of the ola obligations. Let's say he did them below kulan or mata. So then we'll say mechza kasher, mechza pasul. Then half below will be for chatas and half for disqualified. Chatzia lamala v'chatzia lamata. If he did half above and half below, Eina kshera elastuma. The only one that's kosher is the one that he didn't specify. And meaning to say, the only one that's kosher is one he didn't specify. The 2 kinim that he didn't specify. And so umitchalakas b'nein, and then they have to go and make it up. The umifurashin lo, but the ones that he had said, this one's no, this one's a chatas, none of them will be okay if he did them below. But why not? chatas oaf. Why don't we say the same question that the ola became a chatas? And the Gemara is going to say, and if you want to say, don't say that our Mishnah is now like Rabbi Yeshua, because the Gemara is going to quote this very, very complicated Mishnah, which proves that the whole daf, that this whole Mishnah is like Rabbi Yeshua. And so then the Gemara is going to say, well, therefore, the Gemara's ultimate conclusion is going to be, okay, granted, Rabbi Yeshua says that the Ola becomes a Chatas, but that doesn't mean that the owner of the Chatas has fulfilled their obligation. They still have to bring another Chatas. That's going to be the Gemara's conclusion. Well, have a good day, Namo. Yasha Koach. Moshe, maybe I'll see you later. We'll talk to Boaz. We'll talk to Boaz. Hey. Hold on one sec. So the Gemara says, and if you want to say this is not like Rabbi Yeshua, we can't say that because we learn from the next Mishnah in Kenan, which at the end is going to bring Rabbi Yeshua's position, where he clearly shows that he's like all the authors of this Mishnah, where it says, a woman says, I have to bring a pair of birds. She says, I will bring two birds, two olas, if I'll give birth to a male, in which case she has to bring her other two karbanos, one for an ola, one for a chata. So she says, I'll bring a pair, yalda zachar. So she now gives birth to a male, maybe a shtei kinim. She has to bring two pairs. Achas l'nitra, one for her vow, i.e. two olas, v'achas l'chovasa, and one for her giving birth, so one ola, one chatas. And the son of a Kohen, Kohen has to do three above for the ola and one below. But let's say let's say the Kohen didn't do that. He did two above and two below. Very simply, he has to bring below nimwach, and he didn't ask her which one was which. She clearly has to bring one more as an ola, one more bird. That's very obvious, that case. But now let's say the Kohen didn't mishtei minim. Let's say he brought it from two different types of birds. Well, the birds have to match. Either two torm or two bnei yonah. So then she has to be tavi shtaim. She has to bring two more birds, one for an ola, for each one for an ola, but one from each type to make sure she's bringing it properly. Let's say Persha Nidra. Let's say when she vowed to bring the bird, she said, I'm going to bring it from, as an ola, she said, I'm going to bring it from a specific type of bird, either the Torah or the Bnei Yonah, but she doesn't remember which vow she made. So she, out of a doubt, she has to bring her vow from both types. And so therefore, at first, at the outset, she has to bring three pairs. Two for two Torim as an Ola, two Bnei Yonah as an Ola, plus the Ola and the Chatas, which can come from anyone. And so therefore, the outset, she has to bring six. And no, it should be six. Her vow is four, and then in addition to that, they say four. In addition to that, let's see what Rashi says. Hold on, let's just see what Rashi says. Pirsha Nidra. Let's see what Rashi says here. Okay. Pirsha Nidra. Kishinadra Harel Aikain Pirsha Samin Shetavi Ve'eni Odes Ma Pirsha. She said what she has to bring, which she doesn't say. Im Torah Bnei Yonah. V'yi nasna shnei kina l'kohen, and she gave two pairs, right? Four. So the Rashi saying it's a different case. So you're correct, Bill. So she brought two pairs, and she has to bring from each one. Each one is an ola, so she has to bring two from the Torah and two bnei Yonah. And then the Kohen, what did he do? He gave two above. He did one pair above and one below. So now since she did that, since the Kohen messed up, we don't know if he did the one above properly or the one below properly. She has to bring three more birds. One bird for an ola from the type that she brought, and that comes in case of the one that was disqualified. and then you have to be mimin echad. Okay, actually, this case we'll pick up tomorrow. We'll start from this case of Perish and Nidra tomorrow. That'll be our discussion for Rosh Chodesh Daf. Baruch Hashem. Baruch Hashem.